Delegates at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt have been given one more day to break a deadlock over several very important issues. Topping that list, a so-called loss and damage fund to help poor countries hit by climate disasters. The European Union is backing a proposal to compensate countries hit by storms, droughts, or floods, provided that those countries make tougher emissions cuts. But divisions remain over exactly who would be eligible. Delegates are also waiting to see if the world's two biggest polluters, the U.S. and China, if they will sign on. Well, Germany says that China must contribute to a compensation fund rather than benefiting from it. Jochen Flassbart from the German Development Ministry told us details are still being worked out.
Well, I think it's basically here now about the design of the different instruments and whether or not we get a dedicated fund and who pays into this fund. And we believe that this has to be a broad range of countries, also innovative instruments. But to be very clear and explicit, countries like China have to be part of those who are paying to those who are in need. And we also want to link this with the overall mitigation agenda, because we need to limit climate change to 1.5 degrees. Otherwise, we need more efforts for adaptation. And at the end, there is more pain in the world and more need to pay for loss and damage.
All right, I'm joined now by DW's DWs Owen Beck. He is at the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Tim, so let's start with China. Do we know, is China ready to contribute to this loss and damage fund?
It will be very difficult for China to agree what's on the table at the moment. And that's because China has been part of the G77, a group of developing countries pushing for exactly this loss and damage fund in the last couple of years, and also during this past 2 weeks. But what is actually on the table right now would mean that China would switch from being a potential receiver of money to the side of those who pay for it, a donor, and that is not very well seen among the Chinese negotiators.
The European Union says it doesn't want to help developing countries. The terminology it supports now is helping the most vulnerable countries. Why are we talking about this change in terminology, and which countries qualify as most vulnerable?
The criteria to which most vulnerable would refer, that is still part of the negotiations, and it will also still be beyond this year's conference. But what is very clear, what the EU wants to address here, is that, as you just said, only the very vulnerable should benefit from payments. And who are those countries? Those countries are island states, which are actually threatened to be washed away by sea level rise or storms. Those are countries in Africa, suffering from drought, or countries in Southeast Africa, Southeast Asia, countries which do not have the means, the economic strength to recover from damages being caused by climate change. And this does not include China, a very strong economy, which does indeed has the means to pay for its losses and damages.
That's right. It has the means, maybe it lacks the will. What about this summit as a whole? Delegates have an extra day to find common ground. Are they going to be able to do it?
Well, EU sources we spoke to today were slightly optimistic to find a solution, not only on the loss and damage fund by tomorrow afternoon, evening, but also on other topics. But it's not only about China coming back to the fund. It's also about the US. The US has been very reluctant on this issue, and still is. Yeah. And there will be challenges to convince these two parties.
DW's DWs Owen Beck joining us tonight from the COP27 Climate Summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Tim, thank you very much.